Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is May 28th, 2024. Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, one day after Memorial Day. Again, in remembrance of all our veterans. Let's get on to the first story. It's out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories and is titled The Skull Tower. Archaeologists have previously found a few hundred skulls in the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, the site of present-day Mexico City. However, ongoing research has found this was only the tip of the iceberg, and the human sacrifices numbered in the thousands. Archaeologists were aware the Aztec performed human sacrifices, but the truth of how many were killed in the most horrific fashion became undeniable in 2015. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, found what was known as a trophy rack near the site of the Templo Mayor, which is present-day Mexico City. The display, known as Hui Somtali, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, I have a feeling I'm not, was about the size of a basketball court. It measured 115 feet long, 45 feet wide, and 16 feet in height. Research has found that captives were sacrificed at the Great Temple. First, they were taken to the top where 4 priests would hold them prostrate over a stone slab. Their abdomen would be sliced open by a 5th priest using a flint knife that split open the chest. Then their still beating hearts were removed. The organ would be placed in a bowl held by the statue of the god being honored. The body would be hurled down the temple stairs to land at the bottom of the pyramid. Decapitation followed. Then the head was skinned and the muscles removed. Holes were carved into the sides of the flesh so they could be threaded onto a wooden pole. Marks on the bones testify that they were all defleshed. The Aztec also shot their victims full of arrows, clawed, sliced, stoned, crushed, skinned, and buried them alive in their ritual sacrifices. Despite the belief that captive warriors were the frequent offering, children seen as pure and unspoiled were killed to appease the gods. The choice of victims was dictated by the calendar and to which deity the sacrifice was being made. In 2002, government archaeologist Juan Alberto Román Berelleza announced the results of forensic testing on the bones of 42 children, mostly boys around age 6, sacrificed at Mexico City's Templo Mayor, the Aztecs' main religious site, during a drought. All shared one feature: serious cavities, abscesses, or bone infections, painful enough to make them cry. It was considered a good omen if they cried a lot at the time of sacrifice, which was probably done by slitting their throats, Roman Berelleza said. The skull rack was built in front of the Templo Mayor, which consisted of a pyramid with 2 temples on top. The skulls were faced inward toward the Zombali's hollow center. Once the skulls deteriorated, perhaps after months or years in the elements, the priests would make a mask out of it and use it as an offering dish, or add it to the towers of skulls that flanked the rack. The Spanish conquistadors, upon setting eyes on the trophy rack, estimated it contained about 130,000 skulls. Andres de Tapia, a soldier who traveled with Cortez in 1521, said he counted tens of thousands of skulls. Many claim the conquistadors had exaggerated the number, but with this discovery it turns out they were accurate in what they described. The Aztec, who had never seen horses until the arrival of the Spaniards, went on to place horse heads on the skull racks. However, this was not the only animal that was sacrificed by the Aztec. In 2013, when excavations were taking place for a subway extension, a dog's skull with holes in it was found. It indicated it was displayed on a rack, along with a woman's skull and 2 men's skulls, which were found nearby. They were dated to between 1350 and 1521. A dog's skull had never been found before. 3/4 of the skulls belonged to men between the age of 20 and 35. 20% are women, and the rest were children. Those sacrificed did not appear to be slaves or captives, since they were in relatively good health. Ironically, the Metropolitan Cathedral was built over the temple. The Aztecs settled in what is now Mexico City around 1325. In 1978, workers at a place known as the Island of the Dogs, about 7 feet down, struck a massive stone disc that measured close to 11 feet in diameter and a foot in thickness. It weighed 8 tons. The relief card on it was pronounced, I know I'm not going to pronounce this right, Koyolxauhqui, and dated to the end of the 15th century. 13 buildings were demolished, some dating back to the 19th century, in order to continue excavating the area. More than 7,000 objects were unearthed, including skeletons of turtles, frogs, crocodiles, and fish. There were also pottery, figurines, decorated human skulls, and knives of obsidian and flint, which were the type used to sacrifice victims. As of 2020, over 600 skulls have been unearthed that were displayed on racks. It's believed the tower was constructed between 1486 and 1502, and the skull pyramid was just one of 7 that stood there. There were 2 types of skull pyramids. One displayed carved stone skulls, and the other, made of wood, displayed real human skulls. Lopez Lujan, who worked at the Templo Mayor site, described where chemical tests on the stucco floors of Aztec temples were found to have been soaked with iron, albumin, and genetic material consistent with human blood. There had been speculation that some of the human sacrifices were a form of population control disguised as honoring gods that never seemed to be fulfilled. However, many that found themselves under the priest's sharp knife came from further afield. With the use of DNA tests, scientists have examined genetic markers from the remains found in the Templo Mayor, revealing that some came from across southern Mexico, or perhaps they were traders or travelers who were at the wrong place at the wrong time. The Maya, who predated the Aztec by about 400 years, also sacrificed humans. Their carvings and mural paintings are similar to the Aztec, including a Maya ceremony in which a costumed priest is shown pulling the entrails from a bound and apparently living sacrificial victim. In a 2011 article written for History Today magazine, historian Tim Stanley wrote the following, quote, "The Aztecs were a culture obsessed with death. They believed that human sacrifice was the highest form of karmic healing. When the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan was consecrated in 1487, the Aztecs recorded that 84,000 people were slaughtered in 4 days. Self-sacrifice was common, and individuals would pierce their ears, tongues, and genitals to nourish the floors of temples with their blood. Unsurprisingly, there is evidence that Mexico was already suffering from a demographic crisis before the Spanish arrived." Very interesting, huh? I mean, I don't know. I wonder if any of those priests that were doing the sacrificing, I wonder if they ever went under the, what do you call it, under the knife themselves. You know, it's easier to say, the God needs this and this, until I wonder if anybody said, well, I think the gods need one of you guys. That would be the end of the human sacrifices. All right, the next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled, "Research Finds Sodom and Gomorrah Incinerated by a Fireball." According to the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah were so sinful that God decided to punish them with a total destruction. It came in the form of a fireball from the sky. Now, the accuracy of that story has been proven. Researchers described that a meteor cloudburst incinerated the city's 8,000 inhabitants in the blink of an eye. It turns out that God's punishment was so severe that it left only ashes in its wake. This event occurred around 1650 BC, and 20 miles away, Jericho's wall came down. Scientists now believe that heavenly event described in the Bible was literally a meteor that fell from the sky and destroyed everything in its path, including multiple cities and small villages. It razed a 100-acre city on the northern shore of the Jordan River Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea. The fireball laid waste to the area and ruined agriculture for several hundred years. It detonated about 2.5 miles above the earth, but even at that distance, that blast created a 740 mile per hour shockwave. There were no survivors. Humans and animals were incinerated, as proven by examination of remains. There was extreme disarticulation and fragmentation of bones. According to Professor James Kennett of the University of California at Santa Barbara, he wrote the following, quote, "We saw evidence for temperatures greater than 2,000 Celsius. There's evidence of a large cosmic fireball close to the city called Tal el-Haman. I think one of the main discoveries is shocked quartz. These are sand grains containing cracks that form only under very high pressure. We have shocked quartz from this layer. That means there were incredible pressures involved to shock the quartz crystals. Quartz is one of the hardest minerals. It is very hard to shock. End quote. Since 2005, archaeologists have been working at this ancient wall city located in a part of the Great Rift Valley known as the Middle Gore. Tal-e-Haman had been settled for thousands of years during the Chalcolithic period and the Bronze Age. It was 5 times larger than Jerusalem and 10 times larger than Jericho. Evidence was found that this event was comparable to the Tunguska blast, or a smaller version of the impact that killed the dinosaurs. Pottery shards and building materials melted into glass, which can only be obtained through extremely high temperatures. Soil samples found melted metals, including iron. There had been debate as to whether Tal-e-Haman was the biblical city of Sodom. It's believed the event generated the story that inspired the account written in the book of Genesis. It also could have played a part of the story of the burning of Jericho in the book of Joshua. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah is recorded in Genesis. Abraham is told by God and 2 angels that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that it faced destruction. Abraham pleaded for the righteous people living there, including his nephew Lot and his family. 2 angels disguised as men visit Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot meets them at the city square and invites them to his home. That night, before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surround the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." The angels blinded the men around the house and warned Lot to flee with his family before God brings his wrath down on the sinners. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities. According to the Bible, Genesis 19, the sins against God that brought down destruction on them was not only homosexuality, but other despicable conduct. Now, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Sodom became the basis for the concept of sodomy to refer to deviant sexual behavior. From Gomorrah came the prefix amora, which also denotes human sexual behavior that goes against nature. So there you go. A lot of these stories that, whether it's the Bible or another source, people think that it's either made up or exaggerated, and now they're discovering that these events actually did happen. Whether you want to, whether you want to see it as an act of God or just nature, wrong place, wrong time, it did happen. Because I think when people read these stories, and of course they're ancient, they think that it's made up. The writers, they made stuff up, maybe like to make a point kind of deal. It turns out they were right. So let's go on to our another story. This is out of Mysterious Universe, and it's titled The Mysterious Spanish Humanoid Invasion of 1968. One curious aspect of the UFO phenomenon is how many sightings seem to come in waves, with many witnesses coming forward in the same area within a short span of time for whatever reasons. This is true not only for UFOs, but also for their supposed occupants, and paranormal researcher and author Albert S. Rosales has uncovered one such wave of encounters from 1968 in Spain and has kindly passed along a selection of bizarre reports from that year. Here we will look at a country that at the time seemed to be besieged by an array of humanoid sightings and high strangeness. Quite a few of these reports from 1968 seem to have happened right in people's own homes, the safety of their own rooms, not enough to protect them from the strange. One such case involved a man named Ventura Munoz from Colmenarejo, Madrid, Spain. One night he was drifting off to sleep when he was pulled from its clutches by a deep voice calling out to him. As he sat in the gloom looking about for the source of this intrusive voice, a large, dark humanoid shape materialized from the murk before him, with eyes that were an intense red, very persuasive and perversive. This mysterious figure apparently offered Munoz anything he desired, but the man refused and began praying. As soon as the praying began, the strange entity simply melted away into the darkness, never to be seen again. What was going on here? That same year, an 8-year-old witness in Malaga, Spain, woke up to quite a strange sight indeed. There, standing in her bedroom, were 3 curious small humanoid figures described as having large heads and rough skin. These entities apparently took her to a craft outside, and within it performed an examination on her, during this process implanting some sort of device in her body. There is no word on what happened to her after this, and her case remains a conundrum. Another 8-year-old, known only as Julia G., was in her bedroom in Huelva, Spain, when she awoke to see a dark-skinned woman that was not at the same time extremely luminous. A dark-skinned woman that was at the same time extremely luminous, looming over her at the foot of the bed. This enigmatic woman was dressed in a white robe and was rather creepily just standing there smiling at the witness. The scared little girl allegedly hid under the covers, after which she felt something grasp at her several times. When she dared to look again, the figure was gone. In the summer of that year, a Trinidadian named Gomez Sanchez was at her home in Capuchinos, Malaga, Spain, doing chores along with a young neighbor when they had an experience they would never forget on the indoor patio of the home. As she went about her chores, her attention was suddenly captured by a thin figure with long hair and less than a meter in height, with a disproportionately large head resembling that of a newborn. The sight sent her running and screaming as the entity jumped up to run along the rooftop while letting out a loud howling scream. A neighbor by the name of Jose Santana Cordova heard the ruckus and went to the rooftop armed with a large club, where he saw the creature himself, but was unable to catch up to it before it disappeared. Dubious police were called in to investigate but found no evidence of such an entity. One morning in November of 1968, a 6-year-old witness was playing at his house in Barrio del Carmen, Valencia, Spain, when he saw perched upon an outside terrace a strange winged creature that looked like it was looking around for something. The witness purportedly approached this bizarre creature out of sheer curiosity, and as he drew closer he could see that the wings were leathery and bat-like, and that the thing was devoid of feathers. When he got closer, the creature whirled around to face him, and the witness could see that it had a semi-human face, and his body was human-like also, and it was perched on a chair. It was perched on a pair of feet that ended in claws. This beastly thing then lifted off on its wing and flew out of sight. 1968 also brought plenty of these sorts of encounters that occurred outdoors. In January of that year, an unnamed witness was at a boarding school in El Escorial, Madrid, Spain, and he decided one afternoon to climb a nearby hill with a friend. After reaching the top of the hill, they spied a solid, dull-looking, cigar-shaped object. And although no humanoids were actually sighted, the timing of the incident is interesting. Rosales' report reads, quote, "They looked at it for a few seconds before they could comment on it and decided it was not a cloud, since the edges were crisp and there were some obvious three-dimensionalities to it. The object was huge, since they actually had to move their heads from left to right to see it end to end. Within 15 to 20 seconds, the object seemed to shrink in size, tilt, and vanish. To their estimation, the whole incident lasted not more than 30 seconds. They ran down to the school to report what they saw, and a group of the other children were very excited when they saw the witnesses. To their surprise, their excitement was due to the fact that both had been missing for over 2 hours and had missed lunch and the head count. Fortunately for them, the Franciscan monk in charge of the school was very sympathetic and offered to call the local U.S. Air Base at Torrejon to ask about the phenomena. The base reported that there had been no scheduled test flights that day, but were very interested in a personal report. Both witnesses declined. The fact this happened towards the very beginning of the whole humanoid wave is intriguing. Indeed, the very next month there was an odd sighting when a huge, hairy creature looking very much like Bigfoot was seen drinking from a pond of, at El Escorial, Madrid, Spain. The hairy biped was apparently seen by other witnesses in the area at around the same time. In spring of that year, a 14-year-old witness was working on his father's farm when he saw something odd in the wooded area nearby. The report read, quote, "The 14-year-old witness was working on his father's land located in a wooded area when around 11:30 a.m. he saw emerging out of the tree line located next to the Vencherque River at about 200 meters away two shiny metallic objects or figures resembling metallic robots, silvery in color and about 2.5 meters in height, which were walking towards the witnesses with their arms straight down on their sides and without moving their legs. Both entities seemed to move in unison, had square heads and thorax, and on each of their hands they were carrying some sort of metallic briefcase. When they were about 60 meters from the witness, he ran home and notified his parents of what he had seen. Immediately the adults searched the area but failed to find anything." End quote. The same spring, a woman in Monte Ulia near San Sebastian, Basque Country, Spain, saw a bright light descend towards a peach tree in her yard. When the light touched down, it disgorged two very tall men wearing white diving suits and what appeared to be wings on their backs. They apparently spoke to the witness in Spanish, saying they were looking for passage. The woman lost consciousness, and the next morning, when she examined the area, she found it to be scorched, the tree burnt to a crisp. Also, that spring, 4 young girls were out collecting flowers in Palmar de Troya, Andalusia, Spain, when witness Ana Garcia Gonzalez saw movement behind a nearby bush. When the girls approached, they saw a human-like figure. When they drew closer, they could see that it was a beautiful, ethereal-looking woman with a round and pink face, large black eyes, and wearing a brown mantle. At the time the story hit the media, and flocks of people gathered in the area convinced that the girls had seen the Holy Virgin Mother. That same month, in March of that year, an unnamed witness was taking a walk next to a deserted ruined castle at San Vicente de Sonseria, La Rioja, Spain, on a very quiet night, and sat down on one of the patio areas, almost falling asleep. At around midnight, he snapped out of his sleepy stupor to see standing just 10 meters away 3 huge humanoid figures with very wide shoulders that were completely covered in black hoods that reached all the way to the ground, and each one carrying what appeared to be a scythe. These enigmatic intruders apparently just stood there staring at the witness, and all 3 had large, round, red eyes that seemed to blink in unison as they looked at the witness. The witness allegedly fled in terror and hid in a nearby grapevine field until morning. In the summer of that year, a young man visited an area of Palmar de Troya, Utrera, Andalusia, Spain, with his family in the hopes of seeing an apparition of the Virgin Mary that had been frequently seen in the vicinity. They joined a group of other people there for the same reason, and Rosales' report continues thus, quote, "At sundown, the group waited for something to happen. Looking around in all directions, after what seemed to be quite a long time, the witness spoke to one of the men present, who seemed to be very well informed of the situation and happenings. This man pointed to a nearby wooded hill where the Virgin had been seen recently. The man then walked towards the hill and entered the woods, quickly disappearing from the view of the others present. Meanwhile, as the young man watched the man disappear behind some trees, he saw what appeared to be some type of humanoid figure, which had suddenly appeared, completely immobile and silent. The strange figure resembled a thick bowling pin, and it didn't seem to have any depth, and was facing towards the group. It lacked any arms or legs or any discernible facial features. It was the height of a man, and it was uniformly shiny, even though it did not illuminate its surroundings. It supported itself on the ground by its bottom base. Surprised by what he was seeing, the young man was unable to move. He yelled at his family, asking them if they had seen the strange figure. Apparently his family and the others had not seen a thing. The others thought he had seen the man who had walked into the woods earlier. Still staring at the strange figure, and watched as it disappeared and then reappeared again within the wooded area, finally disappearing from sight for good. Perplexed by what he had seen, the young man immediately returned with his family to Sevilla. As they drove back on the highway, the whole family observed, flying above the fields on the side of the road, it looked like a glowing cloud. Even though it seemed to be moving at the same speed of the automobile and going in the same direction, it eventually fell back and was lost from sight. End quote. What was going on here? That was some summer. In August, a witness by the name of Pedro Pablo Barrios was driving between Betanzos and Villalba, Spain, when he suddenly saw a very luminous object shaped like two plates glued together and with an antenna rise into the sky near his vehicle. The strange craft rotated, and he could see it had two bright lights on each end and a sort of H-shaped device with three hanging leg-like protrusions on its belly. The report said, quote, "The craft chased Barrios, approaching very close on two occasions. Finally, Barrios stopped and parked on the side of the road to see the object more clearly. A few seconds later, the object rose up into the air and vanished. According to the witness, during the chase, he saw several pedestrians on the road who apparently also saw the object and had to lay flat on the ground to avoid being struck by the low-flying craft." End quote. Although there was no humanoid sighted on this occasion, the timing is once again interesting. In that same August, a rancher by the name of Jose Pio Mayo was bringing back the cattle to the town of Belagua, Navarra, Spain, accompanied by his dogs, when he suddenly saw what appeared to be two approaching shadowy figures that seemed to be hovering over the ground in a wingless object that looked like a sort of a canoe. The report continues, quote, "Jose watched awestruck as the object and figures approached within 10 meters of his location. According to Jose, the occupants of the boat saw him and then made a sharp right turn and quickly disappeared into the bush. The whole time, his two dogs carried behind his legs. The two figures appeared to have been sitting inside the flying canoe, side by side. The canoe-like object was about 4 meters long. At no time did the occupants communicate or acknowledge the presence of the witness. The object flew at a very low speed the whole time. That night, Jose was unable to sleep, and the next morning returned to the site to check out, but did not find anything out of the ordinary. However, his dogs refused to accompany him. Other dogs had to be put down several days later as it developed a strange malady all over its body, something resembling tumors." End quote. The following week, a local man by the name of Juan Gascon del Toro was returning on his bicycle from hunting on some local pasture land in Aldaya, Valencia, Spain, and as he turned a corner, he saw about 100 meters away an object which had apparently landed on a field. This object was described as being football-shaped and standing on 4 metallic legs. What was even stranger than this was what was lurking nearby. The report read, quote, "Next to the object were some figures which the witness first thought were children. However, as he kept approaching the object and arriving to within 40 meters from it, he stopped and looked directly at the craft. The craft was about 8 meters in diameter and about 3.20 meters in height. Its base was about 60 centimeters from the ground and had landed on 3 leg-like protrusions, the same color as the object. On the top of the craft, he could see what resembled a metallic or iron antenna connected to a shiny protrusion on the top of the craft. He could see a door about 1.5 by 0.5 meters on which stood two apparent occupants of the craft, standing on a protruding 4-rung ladder, again the same color of the craft. The humanoids were apparently 1.45 meters in height, were wearing helmets with dark visors similar to divers, and from the area of their mouth protruded a sort of segmented rubber hose, which connected to their chests, brown in color. On the chest they wore a white belt. They were dressed in white diving suits. The belt seemed a little dimmer than the rest of the suit. They also wore small white boots. The humanoids were completely indifferent to the witness and just observed him without any apparent reaction. Del Toro then boarded his bicycle and took a side route, losing sight of the landed craft. The encounter lasted about 1 minute. He heard no sounds during the encounter." End quote. The following month, on September 24th, 1968, a local shepherd in Puerto Serrano, Cadiz, Spain, saw a round, luminous object in a nearby field emitting bright beams of light. As he approached, he apparently heard voices calling his name, but the craft suddenly rose up into the sky and disappeared at a great speed. Interestingly, on that very same day, a woman in Cedeira, La Coruña, Spain, saw a bright light and two tall figures walking towards her on a rural road, each one of them with lights of changing color visible on their faces. There would later be found a burned area around 2 meters in diameter wrenched into the grass at the site. In November of that year, businessman Francisco Donis was driving near Castillo de Alarcón, Cuenca, Spain, on his way to Malaga when he received a telepathic message instructing him to go to a certain isolated location. He felt overwhelmingly compelled to go there, and when he reached the designated spot, he was surprised to see a disc-shaped object hovering above 3 meters from the road next to the road. The report said what happened next, quote, "As he watched, an opening became visible on the craft and a retractable ladder descended to the ground, on which a human-like figure descended and approached Donis with arms outstretched in an obvious sign of peace. Speaking in perfect Spanish, the stranger informed Donis that his name was Francisco Atienza, and that he was a descendant of extraterrestrials. The stranger was totally human in appearance and wore a one-piece gray diver suit. A long conversation ensued between Atienza and Donis, which took place inside the witness car. Atienza told Donis that he came from a planet called Urin, whose original inhabitants were short, large-headed humanoids. However, there existed on Urin a human colony which lived under huge glass domes since the atmosphere of Urin was toxic to humans. He further explained that life under these conditions had caused a massive sterilization among the human colony, which had more female members than males." End quote. That same month, just 2 days later, witness Manuel Trejo was returning home in his car near Zafra, Extremadura, Spain, when suddenly the engine of the car began to falter as its headlights flickered and dimmed. Moments later, he claims that an invisible shock wave struck his vehicle hard enough to cause his vehicle to careen from side to side. He managed to keep control of his car, and after rounding a bend, he saw standing in the road a humanoid figure wearing a tight-fitting diver's outfit, completely covered in tiny red, green, and blue lights, like a Christmas tree. These lights became even more bright and brilliant as the witness drew closer, but he continued on, passing the figure and letting the strange humanoid fade into the distance. This report would be followed by a wave of UFO sightings in the same area, including a number of which that involved people seeing blurred figures through opaque windows on the craft. Reports like these would continue all through December of that year until it suddenly dropped off, leaving us to wonder about many things. What was it about this place and this year that attracted so much strangeness? One thing that is interesting to note is the wide range of descriptions of these entities. What could this mean? Were these aliens, or perhaps was this a rift open between realities, with interdimensional interlopers coming through some veil between dimensions to bleed over into ours? Or maybe it was just delusions and overactive imaginations. Whatever the case may be, 1968 was surely a bizarre year in Spain. Yep, that falls most definitely into the bizarre category, those stories. Okay, we are back into Stranger Than Fiction stories, and the next story is titled The Black Triangle. There is a 200 square mile area in eastern Massachusetts known as the Bridgewater Triangle, as well as the more ominous sounding Black Triangle. This piece of land in eastern Massachusetts is believed to be the source for unexplainable cryptids and sightings of Bigfoot, UFOs, giant black panthers, ghosts, and disembodied voices. All have been reported there, as well as weird energy, especially at the center, which is Hockomock Swamp, the largest swampland in New England. The three main points are Abington, Rehoboth, and Freetown. It's a hard place to navigate, and many believe this allows unknown creatures to exist there. According to the native tribe that lived in this area, Hockomock translates to the place where spirits dwell. The American colonists named it Devil Swamp, claiming there were ghosts and flying creatures seen there. Sightings of Bigfoot have been reported. The most interesting story dates back to the 1970s, when one went on to kill pigs and sheep. Police responded but found nothing. Profile Rock in Freetown State Forest is a site of murders and satanic activity as well. It's believed the negative energy that encompasses the forest attracts those with evil on their mind. Others believe that since it's just off Route 24 in Asanet, it's a convenient place to dump a body. Asanet Ledge, which is remote, has a sighting of a ghostly figure that stands atop the ledge before leaping into nothingness. At Copicut Road, a phantom truck driver follows drivers, making motions with his arms before disappearing. Horben School in Rehoboth, built in the 1840s, was used until 1937. The one-room school is said to be haunted by its former students. Visitors have reported hearing voices. The school was renovated in 1968, and many believe this work stirred the spirits. In 1978, 2 days after she turned 15, Mary Lou Aruda was reported missing. She was last seen by a newspaper delivery boy about a quarter mile from her home in Raynham. Her bicycle was found in a wooded area, and police suspected foul play as tire tracks were located close by, as well as a butt from a Benson and Hedges cigarette. Witnesses later described seeing a bright green car with a black racing stripe. 3 days after she disappeared, police circulated a poster with a composite likeness of the driver. His name was James Cater, and on September 19th, he came to meet police with his wife and an attorney. He drove a 1976 Opel that matched the description given by the witnesses, and he smoked Benson and Hedges. He was on probation for an incident in 1969. He pled guilty to assault with intent to rape, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and kidnapping on a young girl in 1968. The girl, who was abducted while riding her bike and was tied to a tree, managed to escape. He served 6.5 years for the crime. He denied any knowledge of what happened to the missing girl. 2 months after she disappeared, a dirt bike rider found the badly decomposed body of Mary Lou Aruda tied to a tree in Freetown Fall River State Forest. The ME concluded she died due to positional asphyxia caused by ligature around her neck after she became unconscious while tied to the tree. It was determined she died the same day she went missing. Her identity was confirmed by dental records. In 1979, Cater was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. His conviction would be overturned 2 more times until 1996, when he was convicted and sentenced to a federal prison in California, where he was moved for his own safety. Cater died in 2016 while serving his sentence. Mary Lou's parents outlived him. Her father died in 2022 and her mother the following year. The murder of Mary Lou Aruda was not the only violent crime committed within the Bridgewater Triangle. While the search was being conducted for Aruda, the body of Lisa Arcudi, 17, was found with 4 bullet wounds in an East Bridgewater field. She lived in Martha's Vineyard, and a composite sketch was circulated by police of a driver she hitchhiked with. She had been shot at close range, and one of the bullets entered her heart. She was not raped, but was barefoot, and it was believed she lost her shoes while running from her attacker. Her murder remains unsolved. Taunton State Hospital runs the full gamut of ghostly phenomena, from touches by unseen hands to hair pulling. Parts of the hospital were said to be used by satanic cults in the 1960s and 70s. Originally known as the State Lunatic Hospital, it was built in 1854 on a 154-acre piece of land. In 1975, the main part of the hospital was closed and abandoned. In 1999, the large dome in the administration building collapsed, and in 2008, a fire consumed the theater and administration building. In 2009, it was demolished and architectural features were sold. One of its patients was Antonio Santoro, a.k.a. Anthony Santo, born in 1894, who had immigrated with his family from Italy. In June 1908, when he was 14 years old, he was questioned regarding the theft of a bicycle. He told the startled police that he killed his 2 cousins, James and Frank Marino, in Brooklyn, New York, in March of 1908. He killed James by hitting him on the head with a stone. He killed Frank with a pocket knife and buried him in the woods. He couldn't remember what he had done with James' body. When the authorities in Norton contacted Brooklyn, this crime had not been reported. Santoro then went on to confess to the murder of Louisa Staula of Dedham, whose body was discovered in May 1908. The 6-year-old was found in the Charles River meadow where she had been stoned to death. He also claimed to have assassinated President McKinley, and he was sent to Taunton for an examination. His parents claimed he contracted scarlet fever when he was 7 years old and had not been right since. Investigations of his claim by the police showed there were no family named Marino at 461 Carroll Street, Brooklyn, and other tenants confirmed that no one by that name had lived there for at least a year. The doctor determined he was not connected to the style of death. Strangely enough, when the child's body was discovered by police before Santoro's confession, they surmised it was the work of a lunatic. Her killer was never officially identified. It's unknown what became of Santoro, whether he was committed to Taunton or released back to his family, since technically he was not guilty of any crime, just being feeble-minded, which was the term used in those days. Another inmate at Taunton was Honora Kelly, aka Jane Topin, who, despite having dispatched at least 31 people, at one time was nicknamed Jolly Jane. She was a serial killer known as an Angel of Mercy. She was born to Irish immigrant parents. Her mother Bridget died when she was young, and her father was an alcoholic who was known as Kelly the Crack due to his erratic behavior. After his wife's death, Kelly turned his two youngest daughters, Delia 8 and Honora 6, over to the Boston Female Asylum, which was an orphanage for girls. Delia became a prostitute, and older sister Nellie was committed to an insane asylum, and Honora was placed as an indentured servant in 1862. The Topans never formally adopted Honora, but she changed her first name to Jane and took on their surname. In 1885, Jane Topan, as she was known then, trained as a nurse, and while she was killing her elderly patients with morphine or atropine, was so well liked she earned the moniker of Jolly Jane. She went on to work at Massachusetts General Hospital in 1889, where she killed more victims and was fired within a year. She returned to her prior employer and was dismissed due to administering opiates recklessly. She worked as a private nurse and began in earnest to kill others besides patients. In 1894, she killed her landlord, Israel Dunham, and his wife. 5 years later, she killed her foster sister, Elizabeth Topin Brigham, with a dose of strychnine. In 1901, Topin moved in with Alden Davis when his family hired her to take care of him. She had already murdered his wife, Mattie. Within weeks, she poisoned Davis, his sister Edna, and his two daughters, Minnie and Genevieve. The family grew suspicious and ordered a toxicology screening on Minnie, and the results came back that she had been poisoned. Topin was arrested and in 1902 confessed to 31 murders. She admitted the murders satisfied a sexual fetish. The Hoosier State Chronicles reported that Topin would fondle her dying patients as an attempt to see the inner workings of their souls through their eyes. Once she poisoned a housekeeper whose job she wanted in order to make her appear drunk, even though she had plans to kill the housekeeper's family eventually. She also poisoned herself to get sympathy from men who were courting her. Despite claiming she was sane, the courts found her insane and committed her to Taunton, where she lived until 1938, when she died at the age of 84. Along Route 44 in Seekonk, a red-headed hitchhiker, described as a man with long red hair and beard, is seen walking along the roadside. He is disheveled and dressed in a work outfit. His eyes are reported as being normal, or glowing red or yellow, or just empty dark sockets where his eyeballs would be. When motorists stop to give him a lift, he disappears. Others have actually driven through him. Is this bedeviled area a portal to another dimension? Is this why strange creatures, phantoms, and unexplained acts of violence concentrate in these 200 miles? Perhaps one day we'll know, but for now the Black Triangle keeps its secrets. Interesting, huh? And what a good place to put a lunatic asylum. Yay! Okay, next story is titled Lucky Number 13. This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. How or why the number 13 has acquired a connection to bad luck is not quite clear, but the superstition dates back hundreds of years to the Vikings, the Romans, and even to present day, when many buildings don't have a 13th floor. However, at the end of the 19th century, a club was formed whose purpose was to fly in the face of all superstitions, including the dreaded number 13. The club's inaugural meeting took place on Friday, January 13, at 8:13 in the evening in room 13 of the Knickerbocker Cottage. It was on 6th Avenue and 28th. Apparently nothing had been available on 13th Street. The following appeared in the Philadelphia Recorder in June 1892. Quote, 13 Philadelphia young men have banded themselves together, if rumors are true, in what timid superstitious ones will call a suicide club. The Club of 13, as its name hints, has been organized in contempt of almost all known popular superstitions. The club meetings occur on Friday evenings and on the 13th of the month, in room 13 of a house number 13. The fiery-headed member is the first to enter the hall. All pass under a ladder raised in the room. On taking his seat, the president opens an umbrella handed him by the cross-eyed janitor and sits it under it during the session. The sergeant-at-arms opens the proceedings by breaking a looking-glass. A skeleton sits opposite the president at all feasts, and 2 black cats stalk around the room. The walls are adorned with peacock feathers. Every member is under solemn oath always to spill salt, look at the moon over his left shoulder, stumble whenever lighting from a journey, walk between couples on the street, and when together pass on either side of a post. They are eager just now purchase a raven and rent a haunted house to hold their meetings in. End quote. Captain William Festus Fowler founded the club, since in his own lifetime the number 13 had proved to be lucky for him. He went on to adopt the number as his own personal talisman. By the 19th century, the number 13 had developed an ominous reputation for different reasons. One of them was the Last Supper, where the 13th person was associated with Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Jesus. Victor Hugo was said to leave a dinner table if there were 13 guests seated. Captain Fowler leased a landmark tavern and inn known as the Knickerbocker Cottage. He decided to disprove the superstition against the number 13 by establishing a club that defied all the traditions that were said to rain bad luck on a person. During these years, club life with different themes were a popular way to meet like-minded friends, enjoy a lavish meal, and they proliferated in New York. Bad luck did occasionally rear its head. At one club meeting, a waiter fractured his skull when the traditional indoor ladder collapsed on him. Another time, someone blew up the New Jersey clubhouse with dynamite. The members inside escaped with bruises. Captain Fowler faced his first challenge when he found he couldn't find 12 men from among his associates, not only to join the club, but to sit down to a dinner with 13 guests. Fowler was a Freemason who fought in the Civil War and went on to design several landmark buildings. However, from among his well-heeled acquaintances who were well-educated, many would beg off at the last moment. Fowler also had to convince persons to work at the events, since servers and cooks feared they would be visited with bad luck as well. Captain Fowler designed the menus to reflect the morbid theme of the club. Wine lists were shaped like gravestones, and the meal had 13 courses. Members were dressed totally in black, like an undertaker, and on the way to the dining room they walked under the ladder that had been brought indoors. During the dinner, mirrors were smashed and salt was spilled. After the first dinner, none of the attendees were struck down within the first year, which was a superstition when seating 13 at a table. Eventually, the club had honorary members like Grover Cleveland, Chester A. Arthur, and Theodore Roosevelt. The club members went on to carry the 13th tradition even outside of meetings, by insisting to only be sat at tables of 13. In 1886, the meeting in Coney Island drew in 400 members, and chapters soon sprang up in France, Chicago, England, and other countries. In 1891, the New York Club invited women to a dinner, and they were gifted with perfume bottles in the shape of a skull. A couple of years later, 13 women opened their own chapter in Iowa. In April 1888, 5 years after Captain Fowler had given up the lease on the Knickerbocker Cottage, the roof of the building and several walls fell in a heap. The property was in the process of being demolished, and several workmen were on site. One man was killed and 3 others were injured. The newspaper promptly reminded their readers this had been the 13th club meeting place for many years. By the 1930s, many of these social clubs, including the 13 Club, started to peter out, but not altogether. In 1957, the 13th Club in Philadelphia had the following menu: sugared bumblebees, fried grasshoppers, fried ants, lotus flower roots, salted cherry blossoms, fricasseed whale skin, roasted caterpillars, fried worms, and rattlesnake meat. The food was brought from Japan by a food importer who was a member of the club. No doubt their digestive systems were believers in the curse of the 13. So there you go. And I will be back soon with more eerie news. Until next time.